Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. This whole mess started about 6 months ago when I bought my first house. I'm a software developer in my early 30s, and after years of saving every penny, I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest single-family home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house itself wasn't anything fancy, but it had the one feature that was absolutely non-negotiable for me, a decent-sized, fenced-in backyard. You see, about a year before buying the house, I had rescued a German Shepherd named Buddy from a local shelter. This dog means everything to me. He's 3 years old, incredibly well-behaved, and spends most of his days either sleeping in my home office while I work or lounging in the sunshine in our secure backyard. Buddy is what you'd call a gentle giant. He rarely barks unless there's a delivery person at the front door, and even then it's just a few woofs to let me know someone's there. The dog is so well trained that he won't even chase squirrels without permission. I made sure of that because I wanted to be a responsible pet owner and good neighbor. The neighborhood seemed perfect when I moved in. It's one of those typical suburban developments with single-family homes, decent-sized lots, and an HOA that seemed pretty hands-off. The homeowner association dues were low, maybe $30 a month, and from what I could tell, they mostly just handled basic lawn maintenance standards and holiday decoration guidelines. The HOA meetings were apparently poorly attended because nothing controversial ever happened. For the first few months, everything was great. I was loving home ownership, Buddy was happy with his new yard, and I thought I'd found my perfect little slice of suburban paradise. I'd wave to neighbors when I saw them, kept my lawn neat, and minded my own business. Life was good. That all changed on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I was getting ready for a video conference call when I noticed something white sticking out of my door frame. It was a laminated note that someone had tucked there, probably while I was at my morning coffee run. The note was typed in what looked like Times New Roman font and said something about how the presence of aggressive and intimidating animals was detrimental to the peaceful enjoyment of the community and that I should be more considerate. I read it twice, completely confused. Aggressive animals? I looked out at Buddy, who was sprawled on his side in a sunny spot in the yard, looking about as threatening as a teddy bear. I figured it had to be meant for someone else, maybe blown over from another house or something. I tossed it in the trash and forgot about it. A week later, I got an email that made my blood run cold. The subject line read, "Formal HOA Violation Notice," and it was from someone who signed herself as HOA President. The email was professionally formatted, but the tone was condescending and hostile right from the start. It accused me of violating community bylaws regarding nuisances and disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. But here's the kicker. Attached to the email was a photograph of Buddy. He was lying peacefully in the middle of my own fenced-in backyard, just sleeping in the sun. The photo was clearly taken from a distance, probably from an upstairs window of one of the neighboring houses. It felt creepy and invasive, like someone had been spying on me. The email went on to explain that the visual presence of such a large dog was considered a nuisance under the community guidelines, and that effective immediately, the dog must be kept indoors at all times when not on a leash. It was signed by someone called the HOA President, though no actual name was given. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My dog was in my own yard, behind my own fence, on my own property. He wasn't barking. He wasn't bothering anyone. He was literally just existing. I read the email 3 times to make sure I wasn't missing something, but nope. Someone was actually demanding that I keep my perfectly well-behaved dog locked inside my house because they didn't like looking at him. My first instinct was to assume this was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe there had been complaints about a different dog and they had the wrong address. I decided to handle it like a reasonable adult and go talk to whoever was behind this face-to-face. I did a little digging and found out that the HOA president lived just 2 houses down from me. Her house was impossible to miss. It was the one with the absolutely immaculate, sterile-looking garden that didn't have a single leaf out of place. The lawn looked like it belonged on a golf course, and there wasn't a tree or natural-looking plant anywhere to be seen. Everything was perfectly manicured and artificial-looking. I walked over there one evening after work and found her outside meticulously trimming hedges that already looked perfect. She was a woman in her late 50s with the kind of haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and an expression that suggested she'd been personally offended by something. I introduced myself as her new neighbor and mentioned that I'd received an email about my dog. Before I could even explain that I thought there might be some confusion, she cut me off. She told me there was no confusion at all. According to her, my dog was a menace to the community and needed to be dealt with immediately. When I tried to explain that Buddy was actually very well behaved and had never even left my property, she waved her hand dismissively and said it didn't matter what the dog did or didn't do. Her exact words were something like, "It's not about behavior, it's about what that animal represents." Large, intimidating breeds like that make families with children feel unsafe. I've received numerous complaints from concerned neighbors who are worried about their kids' safety. I asked her which neighbors had complained, because I'd be happy to introduce them to Buddy and show them how gentle he was. Her response was that she couldn't reveal that information due to privacy concerns, but that the complaints were definitely real and legitimate. Then she hit me with the real bombshell. She said the HOA board had already voted on the matter and decided to start issuing daily fines of $50 for every day my dog was visible outside. She pulled out a copy of what she claimed was the relevant bylaw and showed me a section about community nuisances, though the language was so vague it could have applied to almost anything. I asked for a copy of the specific rule that prohibited dogs in their own yards, and she got even more condescending. She explained that I clearly didn't understand how HOA governance worked, and that the board had the authority to interpret the bylaws as they saw fit for the good of the community. When I got home, I immediately pulled out my copy of the HOA covenants that I'd received when I bought the house. I spent the entire evening going through every page, looking for anything about pets or dogs. The only mention I could find was a section about cleaning up after pets in common areas like sidewalks and the community mailbox area. There was absolutely nothing about dogs being prohibited from their own yards or any size restrictions, but the fines started coming anyway. Every day I'd find a new violation notice in my mailbox, $50 for Monday, $50 for Tuesday, and so on. The notices all had the same format and the same accusation, that my dog had been observed outside in violation of community standards. Some of them even had timestamps, as if someone was literally watching my yard and documenting every time Buddy went outside. After a week of this nonsense, I decided I needed to take it to the next level. I researched when the next HOA meeting was scheduled and decided to attend so I could present my case to the full board. Maybe the president was acting on her own and the other board members would be more reasonable. I spent hours preparing for that meeting. I gathered Buddy's training certificates from the obedience classes we'd attended, got a letter from our veterinarian attesting to his gentle temperament and good health, and even put together a short video compilation of Buddy playing calmly in the yard and following basic commands. I was sure that once the board saw the evidence, they'd realize this was all a big misunderstanding. The meeting was held at the president's house, which should have been my first red flag. When I arrived, I found 3 people sitting around her dining room table, the president and 2 others who she introduced as the other board members. They all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and it quickly became obvious that they were just going through the motions. I presented my case as professionally as I could. I showed them Buddy's certificates, played the video of him being calm and obedient, and read portions of the vet's letter. The president barely glanced at any of it, and the other 2 board members looked bored out of their minds. One of them was actually checking her phone during my presentation. When I finished, the president launched into a speech about property values and community standards. She said that regardless of my dog's individual behavior, large dogs simply didn't fit with the neighborhood's aesthetic vision. She mentioned something about protecting the investment that homeowners had made in their properties. Then came the real kicker. The president pulled out a folder and announced that the board had voted that very morning to pass an emergency amendment to the community bylaws. This new rule specifically prohibited any dog over 50 pounds from being visible outside of a home at any time. Buddy weighs about 75 pounds, so this was clearly targeted directly at us. But she wasn't done yet. She informed me that the fines I'd already accumulated totaled over $1,000, and that if I didn't pay them within 30 days and permanently remove my dog from public view, the HOA would place a lien on my property and begin foreclosure proceedings. I sat there in shock as she explained this like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. The other board members just nodded along like bobbleheads, clearly rubber stamping whatever she wanted. That's when I realized that being polite and reasonable wasn't going to work. These people had made up their minds before I ever walked in the door, and they were determined to make my life miserable until I gave in to their demands. I went home that night and did something I'd never done before. I pulled an all-nighter reading legal documents. I made a pot of coffee, got out a highlighter, and read every single word of the original HOA covenants that I'd received when I bought the house. What I found was absolutely infuriating. First, the section on amending bylaws was crystal clear. Any changes to the community rules required a formal vote with at least 30 days' notice to all homeowners, and amendments had to be approved by a 2/3 majority of all property owners, not just the board members. The president's emergency amendment was completely illegal and had no validity whatsoever, but that was just the beginning of what I discovered. Over the next week, I turned into a one-man investigation team. I started documenting every HOA rule violation I could find in the neighborhood, and there were plenty. I walked around with my phone, legally filming and photographing from public sidewalks. The president had a small terrier that barked constantly whenever anyone walked by her house. I documented 20-minute stretches of non-stop barking that had to be bothering every neighbor within 3 blocks. According to the actual bylaws, excessive noise was specifically prohibited. One of the other board members had an old car parked on their front lawn instead of in their driveway, which violated the vehicle storage rules. Another house had trash cans that had been left out on the street for 4 days after pickup, violating the waste management guidelines. I created a detailed log with dates, times, and photographic evidence of each violation. The pattern was clear. The rules were only being enforced against me, while board members and their friends were free to ignore the same bylaws. But the real breakthrough came when I found a loophole that would let me implement some malicious compliance. I wanted to build a taller privacy fence so that Buddy couldn't be seen from neighboring houses, but the bylaws required all new permanent structures to be approved by the Architectural Committee, which was headed by the same president who was harassing me. She'd obviously never approve anything I requested. However, buried in the section on property aesthetics, I found a golden exception. The rules stated that while permanent structures required committee approval, temporary attachments such as seasonal decorations or weather screens did not require approval as long as they were removed within 90 days. I had found my weapon. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. I brought him my mountain of evidence. The illegal amendment, the documentation of selective enforcement, the threatening letters and photos of all the violations that were being ignored while I was being harassed. The lawyer was practically giddy when he saw what I compiled. He said it was one of the clearest cases of harassment and breach of fiduciary duty he'd ever seen. Within a week, he sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA demanding that they stop their illegal enforcement actions and withdraw the invalid amendment. The president's response was to double down. She sent back a letter saying that the HOA stood by their actions and would continue to pursue all available remedies, including foreclosure if necessary. That's when I decided to comply with their demands in the most malicious way possible. I went online and ordered 4 of the most hideous tarps I could find. One was a garish neon orange that could probably be seen from space. Another was a faded yellow color that looked like baby food. The other 2 featured a repeating pattern of cartoon pigs wearing sunglasses that was so ugly it was almost artistic. These weren't just any tarps. They were industrial grade, designed to withstand harsh weather conditions. They were also absolutely massive, each one measuring about 12 feet by 15 feet. I spent an entire Saturday afternoon zip-tying these monstrosities to the inside of my fence. When I was done, my backyard was completely private, and Buddy was no longer visible from any neighboring property. According to the bylaw they were trying to enforce, I was now in perfect compliance. But from the president's house, the view was now an eyesore of epic proportions. Instead of seeing my nice yard with a well-behaved dog, she now had to look at a wall of hideous tarps that clashed with everything in the neighborhood. The best part was that under the temporary weather screen exception, I could keep them up for 90 days without any approval needed. The president lost her mind. I started getting multiple emails per day demanding that I remove the unsightly displays immediately. She claimed they were lowering property values and creating a public nuisance. I responded to each email by referencing the specific bylaw that allowed temporary weather screens and asking her to point out which rule I was violating. She couldn't because I wasn't breaking any rules. I was following their bylaws to the letter. Meanwhile, my lawyer was preparing for court. The HOA had decided to proceed with their lien and foreclosure threats, apparently convinced that they could intimidate me into backing down. They had no idea what they were walking into. The court date arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I showed up in my best suit with a thick folder of evidence and my lawyer by my side. The president strutted in, wearing what looked like an expensive outfit, clearly confident that her position as HOA president would carry weight with the judge. The HOA lawyer presented their case first, arguing that I was in violation of community standards and that my refusal to comply was harming property values. They presented the illegal amendment as if it were legitimate and claimed that my dog posed a safety risk to the community. Then it was our turn. My lawyer systematically dismantled their entire case. He presented the original HOA covenants and highlighted the specific procedures required for amending bylaws, showing that the president's emergency amendment was completely invalid. He showed the judge my documentation of selective enforcement, including videos of the president's own dog barking continuously. The most damaging evidence was a recording I'd made of the HOA meeting where the president had admitted that this wasn't about Buddy's behavior, but about her personal aesthetic preferences. My lawyer played the audio where she clearly stated that large dogs didn't fit with her vision for the neighborhood, regardless of how well behaved they were. The judge was not amused by any of this. He spent about 5 minutes reviewing the evidence before delivering his ruling. He voided all the fines they'd tried to impose, declared the amendment invalid, and ordered the HOA to cease all enforcement actions against me immediately. But he wasn't done yet. The judge went on to scold the president and the board for abusing their power, acting in bad faith, and wasting the court's time with what he called a personal vendetta disguised as community governance. He said their actions were exactly the kind of HOA overreach that gave homeowner associations a bad reputation. The final blow was when he ordered the HOA to pay all of my legal fees, which had added up to several $1,000s. I watched the president's face go white as the judge explained that the money would have to come from the community's reserve fund, which meant every homeowner in the neighborhood would essentially be paying for her personal crusade against my dog. The news of the court ruling spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church social. Within days, I was getting visits from neighbors who wanted to apologize for what had happened and thank me for standing up to the board's overreach. It turned out that a lot of people had been unhappy with the president's increasingly authoritarian approach to HOA governance, but nobody had wanted to be the one to challenge her. My case had opened the floodgates. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following week, but this time it was the homeowners themselves who organized it. The community center was packed with angry residents who had just found out their HOA dues were going to be raised to cover the legal fees from the president's failed lawsuit. The president tried to maintain control of the meeting, but it was clear she'd lost all credibility. Homeowner after homeowner stood up to express their frustration with her leadership and demand accountability. By the end of the meeting, she had been voted out as president, along with the 2 board members who had rubber-stamped her decisions. A new, more reasonable board was elected on the spot. Their first official act was to send me a formal written apology on behalf of the community. The next morning, I went out to my backyard and started removing those ugly tarps. It felt like taking down the Berlin Wall. Buddy was so happy to have his sunny spots back that he spent the entire day running around the yard like a puppy. As I was rolling up the last tarp, one of my neighbors walked by and gave me a thumbs up through the fence. He told me that everyone was grateful for what I'd done, and that the neighborhood felt like a friendlier place already. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm actually glad it happened. Not because I enjoyed the stress and legal fees, but because it taught me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they have official titles and think they have all the power. The new HOA board has been completely reasonable to deal with. They focus on actual community issues like road maintenance and holiday decorations instead of trying to micromanage people's personal lives. Buddy is free to enjoy his yard in peace, and I can work from home without worrying about surprise violation notices. I kept copies of all the documentation from the case, just in case anyone ever tries something like this again. But somehow, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Word has gotten around that I'm not someone who backs down from a fight when I'm in the right. The best part is that Buddy has no idea any of this drama ever happened. As far as he's concerned, he's always been the king of his backyard domain, and that's exactly how it should be. Sometimes the good guys do win, especially when they're willing to do their homework and fight back against petty tyrants who think a little bit of power makes them untouchable. I taught them a lesson they won't forget, and I definitely came out on top. The former president moved out of the neighborhood about 3 months after the court case. I heard through the grapevine that she couldn't handle the embarrassment of facing her neighbors after everything that happened. Her house sold quickly to a nice family with 2 kids and a golden retriever who Buddy has become best friends with through the fence. Life is good in our little suburban paradise, and Buddy is still the best boy in the world, sleeping peacefully in his sunny backyard every single day. Update. 6 months later. Well, it's been 6 months since my last post, and people have been asking for an update, so here we go. Things have been absolutely amazing since the court case, but there have been some interesting developments I thought you'd all want to hear about. First, the financial fallout for the HOA was even worse than I initially thought. It turns out that the legal fees they had to pay didn't just include my lawyer's costs. They also had to cover their own attorney's fees for the case they lost, plus court costs and administrative penalties. The total bill came to almost $15,000, which completely wiped out the community's reserve fund that was supposed to be used for emergency repairs and improvements. The new HOA board had to send out a special assessment notice to every homeowner in the neighborhood, requiring an additional payment of about $200 per household to replenish the fund. Let me tell you, that did not go over well with people who were already angry about the whole situation. But here's where it gets really interesting. About 2 months after the former president moved out, I got a call from someone who introduced himself as her ex-husband. Apparently their divorce had been finalized just before she started her campaign against me and Buddy, and he wanted to apologize for her behavior. He told me that she had a history of getting obsessed with controlling her environment when she felt like other parts of her life were falling apart. The divorce had been messy, she'd lost half her assets, and apparently targeting my dog was how she was trying to feel like she had power over something. He also shared something that made a lot of pieces fall into place. During their marriage, she had been attacked by a large dog when she was jogging, which left her with a genuine phobia of big dogs. Instead of dealing with her trauma through therapy, she decided that the solution was to make sure she never had to see large dogs in her environment. Obviously, that doesn't excuse what she did to me, but it helped explain why she was so irrational about the whole thing. Fear and recent trauma can make people do crazy things, though it doesn't give them the right to abuse their authority to make their personal problems everyone else's problem. The ex-husband also told me that she'd tried the same thing at her previous neighborhood before they got divorced. Apparently, she'd gotten into a similar fight with neighbors over their dog, though that time she wasn't in a position of power, so it didn't escalate to legal action. Speaking of legal action, remember how I mentioned that my lawyer was really excited about my case? Well, he asked if he could use it as an example in a presentation he was giving to a conference of HOA attorneys. With my permission, he turned our case into a training seminar about avoiding liability and abuse of power. The presentation apparently went viral in the HOA legal community, and I've actually gotten calls from people in other states who found themselves in similar situations. My lawyer has started referring these cases to colleagues around the country, and he told me that several other homeowners have successfully used similar tactics to fight back against HOA overreach. One woman in Texas sent me a thank you card after she used my strategy of documenting selective enforcement to get her HOA president removed for trying to ban her vegetable garden. Another guy in Florida said my case inspired him to research his HOA bylaws, where he discovered his board had been illegally collecting fees for services they weren't actually providing. But the best update is about Buddy himself. Remember the family with the golden retriever who moved into the former president's house? Well, their dog is named Daisy, and she and Buddy have become absolutely inseparable. The fence between our yards has gaps that are just big enough for them to touch noses and play through, and they spend hours every day running back and forth along the fence line together. The kids next door, a 7-year-old boy and a 9-year-old girl, have basically adopted Buddy as their honorary uncle. Their parents asked if it would be okay for the kids to help with his care, so now they come over a couple times a week to help brush him and give him treats. Buddy is living his best life, being spoiled by 2 families instead of 1. The boy is especially attached to Buddy. His mom told me that he'd been afraid of big dogs before they moved in, but Buddy's gentle nature has completely changed his perspective. Now he wants to be a veterinarian when he grows up so he can help dogs like Buddy. The new HOA board has been fantastic to work with. They've focused on actual community improvements instead of trying to micromanage everyone's lives. They organized a neighborhood block party last month where Buddy was basically the guest of honor. Half the neighborhood brought their dogs, and it turned into an impromptu dog play date. They've also implemented new transparency rules to prevent anything like my situation from happening again. All board meetings are now recorded and posted online. Proposed bylaw changes require a 30-day comment period, and any enforcement actions have to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before they can be issued. One funny side effect of the whole ordeal is that I've accidentally become the neighborhood's unofficial HOA watchdog. People bring me their violation notices to review, and I help them research whether the enforcement action is legitimate. So far, I've helped 3 different families successfully challenge bogus fines, including one case where the board was trying to charge someone for having the wrong color mailbox when there was no actual rule about mailbox colors. My lawyer suggested that I could probably make some side money consulting for people in HOA disputes, but honestly, I'm happy just helping neighbors when they need it. The whole experience taught me how important it is for regular homeowners to understand their rights and not just assume that HOA boards always know what they're doing. I also kept those hideous tarps just in case. They're folded up in my garage now, ready to be deployed if anyone ever tries to mess with me again. I like to think of them as my nuclear option. Technically legal, but absolutely devastating to property aesthetics. But the most satisfying part of this whole update is that Buddy is now something of a neighborhood celebrity. People stop by specifically to meet him and see the famous dog who brought down a tyrannical HOA president. He loves the attention and has never been happier. Last week, one of the original board members who rubber-stamped the former president's decisions stopped by to apologize personally. She admitted that she'd been intimidated by the president's strong personality and had gone along with decisions she knew were wrong because she didn't want to deal with the confrontation. She thanked me for having the courage to stand up to the bullying because it showed other people that the president wasn't as powerful as she pretended to be. Sometimes it just takes one person to say no to make everyone else realize they don't have to put up with abuse from petty tyrants. The whole experience has made me a much more confident person. I used to avoid conflict at all costs, but now I know that sometimes fighting back is the only way to protect yourself and others from people who abuse their power. Buddy is still the same sweet, gentle dog he always was, completely oblivious to the fact that he was at the center of a legal drama that changed our entire neighborhood for the better. As far as he's concerned, his only job is to be a good boy, nap in the sunshine, and play with his girlfriend Daisy next door. And you know what? He's absolutely right. Life is good when you're surrounded by people who appreciate you for who you are. Whether you're a human or a 75-pound German Shepherd who just wants to sleep in his own backyard. The lesson I learned from all this is that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. You never know who else you might be helping when you refuse to let bullies get away with their behavior. Thanks to everyone who supported me through this whole ordeal. Buddy sends his love and slobbery kisses to all his internet friends who cheered him on. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I'm the maintenance director at an independent senior living center. It's pretty much an apartment complex in which you have to be a senior citizen to reside. We provide 3 meals a day, housekeeping, activities, a bus for transportation, and several other amenities to increase the quality of life because more times than not, they will spend the final years of their life here. Our facility is family-owned and orientated. Family members of current employees are encouraged to apply for positions. We have one rule in our employee handbook: ensure resident safety, happiness, and prolongment of life. I take my job very seriously and take pride in it. I try to go above and beyond to make them all happy. Each resident during the daytime either listens to the radio, play crossword puzzles, or most of the time watch their favorite TV shows. We do not provide television service. Each resident has to provide it themselves, if they choose. Over the last year, there has been a trend of televisions not working in countless units, and when this happens, they are very upset. When I get a work order for a TV, I go and check it out. Most of the time, there is nothing I can do. If the cable isn't cut, everything is plugged in, and there, in no obstruction to the satellite signal, it's going to be a software issue. When this happens, I install an air antenna until their regular service is fixed. The company, and a tech comes out, fixes it, and usually within a couple hours, it stops working again. This is a never-ending cycle of upset residents. Over the course of an entire year, I spoke with several supervisors and tried to schedule for someone to come out and go through the entire property with me to address each issue. They weren't having that. They wanted me to go to each individual unit and have that particular resident call them. This is almost impossible. A lot of them have trouble hearing and discussing complex matters over the telephone, let alone know the 4-digit code and the answer to the secret question. One resident was out of service for over 60 days, and I demanded that they refund or discount this particular resident properly. They ended up only giving her $21 off, which isn't even half of a single month's payment. When I spoke with this particular representative, I told them that wasn't enough and I would be throwing all of their dishes in the dumpster. This is just the tip of the iceberg. These companies have caused significant property damage to the facility. They've ran the cokes in the gutters and down the downspouts. Ran cables draped over the sidewalk, which is a tripping hazard. Installed dishes in the center of courtyards and wherever is convenient for them. All over the property, cables AE strung out on top of the grass for hundreds of feet. They don't bother to bury any cables. I have discussed this numerous times with the owner of the facility of the last year. The last time I spoke with him about it, he gave me the okay to handle the situation and do whatever needed to be done to fix the issue. My options were limited, and the only feasible option I could concoct was using a landline company that didn't need a satellite dish. Well, I have officially finished running new cokes to every single unit, and a landline company has came in and installed boxes and services in each resident's apartment. Residents who have previously had to pay a monthly fee for their television service now get their service free of charge. Those that never had service now do. We have saved over 50 residents money every month, and all in total over 200 plus now have television service that is included in their rent without any increase whatsoever. This was revenge for the representative talking to Miss T in such a negative and rude tone. I couldn't be happier for my residents. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I've worked for a big consulting company around 2005, the kind that grinds employees and shatters their morale, underpays and overworks, you know the kind. This one had multiple clients, sectors, and teams, so HR, in their ever-blessing wisdom, thought that it would be a big team-building exercise to create an internal football-soccer tournament between all the projects that wanted to join. Bear in mind, this was in Argentina. We're passionate about football, that's how you say it in Spanish. Probably way too much for our own good, and we love our little get-togethers to play. So, multiple teams joined. With people of all categories, it was a good team-building idea. Managers and partners playing side to side with the temp guy who just started. Hey, I mean, crazier things have been organized for the sake of team building. I worked on a project where we were stuck in a cave. The manager was, well, like most of the managers I've met on that kind of companies. They are there because they can lick the boots of the clients better than anyone, and they're really good at being able to work their disposable people to the bone. We wanted to join and we wanted to have kits made for the tournament, so one of the guys had the idea to ask the manager for the money for the kits. And manager said enthusiastically yes and gave us the money, but then he said, I want to play, I want to join the team, and we couldn't say no, so he was in. Then came the last and beautiful question of how to name the team. Manager said, oh, I have no idea, whatever you want. So we complied. For the first 4 games until he tore his ACL, manager played, rather poorly, against colleagues, other managers and partners, and had to answer the one question he didn't want to be asked. What's the name of your team? Because the team was named the Worn Out Slaves. Anyway, thank you for watching.